Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this, our ACE Wales annual conference. I'm Piers Burroughs, and I'm the chair of the ACE in Wales and managing director of Burroughs. It's a real pleasure to have you all with us. We have a really fantastic lineup of speakers with excellent subject matter, which I'm looking forward to introducing you to in a moment. The theme of our conference this year is value-based delivery. It's a really relevant topic of the moment. Before we embark on our conference and introduce you to each of the speakers, there's just three things that I want to say to you all, in my own words, perhaps set a little bit of context to our conference, then reflect on what, as audience members, you can expect to gain. You're listening, hopefully you benefit from it, but just reflect on what you might expect to gain. And then lastly, there are a few housekeeping matters which I'll take you through, and then we'll be on to our first speaker. So in terms of my own context to our conference today, it is a challenging world at the minute. We know that there are really pressing challenges that humanity faces, not least the climate catastrophe, which is being brought into stark relief at the current COP26 summit in Glasgow. We know also, as an industry, we are advancing and we're progressing. We're making great strides to try and move forward, whether that's in our use of data, our use of technology, modern methods of construction, or how we try to innovate and use materials in different ways. It is important that we reflect on how we can contribute to achieving societal and environmental goals that that are dear to us. In my opinion, doing nothing is not the answer. It's important that we reflect upon what real value means. And I think there's an opportunity for us to develop the built and natural environment in a way that is sympathetic and is viewed strongly through the lens of what value really means. So that's, if you like, my soapbox moment. Hopefully you all indulge me that, but that just sets some context to our conference. In terms of what you can expect as the audience, we're hoping that you learn about value-based delivery. We've got two speakers, Vickers and Ellie Jenkins, who are going to talk to us about value-based delivery and the Value Toolkit. We think that that will be of real value and benefit to you all. So hopefully you do find value in that. The second thing, we've got Julian Hetherington talking to us about decarbonizing our transport networks. That is absolutely of the moment and a fascinating subject, and we look forward to hearing from Julian. So hopefully, again, you find that of relevance. And lastly, we're delighted that Sophie Howe is able to join us, and Sophie will talk to us about social needs and a prosperous green economy, Sophie being the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. So turning to a few matters of housekeeping, we're hoping that today can be more of a discussion rather than necessarily a lecture. So we have moments where we will be inviting audience participation. We have some digital straw polls that we will be offering to the audience in between transitions between speakers. We have the opportunity for a panel debate with our speakers once we get to the end of the conference. Really look forward to that. We'd encourage you to pose questions, and in order to do that, you can put the questions in the chat and we'll do our best to pick those up. questions that we're not able to raise with our panelists, we're happy to take those offline and as best we can to come back to attendees with responses to those. Questions will be dealt with anonymously, so yeah, we just encourage you to put some questions in the chat. And the last bit of housekeeping is that we are recording today, and so those of you registered to listen to us will receive a copy of the recording in a few days' time, together with a slide pack from each of our speakers. So that's enough from me, and onwards into our conference. Our first speaker is Vickers. Hannah is Chief of Staff at Mace and the former CEO of the ACE. I'm sure most of you will know Hannah's name. Hannah has speaking commitments at COP26, which regrettably means that Hannah isn't able to join us in person, but Hannah is very supportive of our topic, our subject matter here today, and has kindly agreed to prepare a supportive pre-record, which in a moment I'm going to play for you. Hannah's background is an interesting one. Hannah started life as an apprentice and is a civil engineer by training. Hannah worked for the Environment Agency before a stint with Infrastructure UK, which is part of HM Treasury. She was policy lead at the ICE and, of course, our chief executive at the ACE before now currently acting as chief of staff for Mace. So at this point, if I can invite Chetna to play Hannah's pre-recorded video. Thank you, Chetna.
I'm Hannah Vickers. I am the Chief of Staff at Mace, and you may also know me as the previous Chief Executive of the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. So I'm actually sending you a pre-recorded message today because I'm at COP26, so this is the UN Climate Change Conference. So apologies for not being there in person. I really would love to have been there in person, but I'm at COP and I am here representing the construction sector, so hopefully you will forgive me for not being there with you today. Having said that, I really wanted to make sure I was still part of the AC Wales conference because it has a really exciting agenda, and actually a lot of what you're talking about here are things that are really close to my heart. So I didn't want to leave you hanging, so to speak. Just to take a few minutes to kind of reflect on where we are as I sit here at COP. We are in a place now where we are focusing very much on tackling unprecedented challenges. We've heard that a lot with COVID the last 2 years, and we can take that same mindset into where we need to get to in terms of reaching net zero by 2050. So what that means for our industry is huge. We have such a really big impact on our economy's ability to and our country's ability to be able to reach net zero that we need to take some responsibility for this. And I think we're doing it already. Part of what you're going to be focusing on today in terms of value actually sits at the centre of that. So whilst it's quite easy, and I sit here surrounded by politicians making sweeping statements and country level commitments, actually I think what you're going to be doing and what you're going to be talking about at this conference is really the mechanism that's going to make that real. That's what's really going to land it in projects and really probably actually move us towards net zero rather than the high level rhetoric and the ambitions. So what we're going to be talking about today, and I'm going to introduce, I know Ellie Jenkins is going to be here to sort of speak to you in a bit more detail about it, is the Value Toolkit. Now, this is something that has been developed to, if you like, rechip our project development and delivery process to make sure that we are putting value at the heart of the decision making as we move through that process. So it's very practical, it's very hands-on, and it covers a whole suite of definitions of value so that you can tailor it and use it for your clients. So whether you've got a client that is particularly interested in net zero, or someone who's perhaps interested in social value, or even those clients that maybe more practically want to think about quality, want to think about sort of assuring and being completely confident in what they are having delivered in their project and how they would use data in their decision making around that. The Value Toolkit can be adapted to support all of those different clients, because actually what it is a process that walks you through end to end how you assess and articulate and bring value into your decisions around the options on your project, but also on how you go to market and how you contract with the supply chain. So it's very structured, And I'm really hoping that when Ellie gets into the detail, you'll see how useful and relevant it is for your day-to-day roles. So just to close, I want to emphasize actually the focus is really to shift the emphasis of decision-making to be more broadly around value, rather than just perhaps where we are at the moment, which is around capital cost or schedule, because those are the things that we are used to making decisions based on. So I really hope that you enjoy the conference today. Again, apologies that I can't be there with you. I'm very happy to, to sort of follow up afterwards, and I look forward to coming back and actually seeing you again in Wales, to be able to, to sort of continue this conversation. But I hope we have a really excellent conference today, and I know that Ellie will be doing us proud in terms of taking you through and answering your difficult questions around the Value Toolkit. So enjoy.
Our sincere thanks, ACE Wales, to Hannah Vickers and her very relevant pre-record, and it's definitely a neat segue into Ellie Jenkins. Before we invite Ellie to take the stage, we're going to test our technology. So our first straw poll, if I can invite Chetna to share that with you all, is quite a provocative one, and please encourage you all to vote. Does the audience think that the UK procurement system is fundamentally broken? So if I can encourage you all to vote. And I'm assured that the results appear in a contemporary fashion, and provided that they do, we can have a few minutes discussing the outcome. So this is interesting. So we have 70% of our audience suggesting that at times the procurement system is broken. We've got 30% with fairly entrenched views that the procurement system is broken. So to me, that suggests that we are moving in the right direction, but perhaps we could do better. And I think that is a neat point to bring Ellie Jenkins in. Ellie is the sector lead for the Value Toolkit at the Construction Innovation Hub. Ellie's background is varied, spent time with a tier 1 contractor, and is a partner at a business called Akolov, which specializes in modern methods of construction. Ellie's been instrumental in developing the Value Toolkit, and I'd like to invite Ellie to talk to us about it. Ellie.
Thanks, Piers. Just bear with me a second while I share my screen.
I'll turn my camera off.
So hopefully, Piers, you might have to give me a nod that you can see my screen now. Is that right? Fantastic, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Piers. And Hannah has given me a really lovely segue into what we're here to talk about today. So as Piers mentioned, I am the industry lead for the Value Toolkit. And I've got the privilege of taking the Value Toolkit through its pilot phase with the sector and as it moves into legacy. And we are at a really exciting point. So I'm delighted to be able to come and speak to you today, because really there is a huge role for consultants in this space to drive forward value-based delivery. So we're going to start on a high note. The time is now, the momentum is really high, the policy environment is great for value-based delivery, but also our stakeholders are now demanding more. And as Hannah speaks to us directly from COP26, we must all recognise that we as individuals, as client advisors, as clients or investors in the built environment, can and must do a better job of ensuring that our decisions are driven towards a sustainable future for the next generation and for the sector that we all care so much about. Now, I'm going to take a little segue here just to say that if you haven't yet watched David Attenborough's speech at COP26, I'd really encourage you to watch it with your colleagues, with your children. There was a real bit in it that resonated with me about the changes that we need to make in the built environment. And that was that we're going to have to learn together how to achieve a sustainable future and ensure that no one is left behind. And really, in essence, that's what we're looking to do through the Value Toolkit. We've had hundreds of organisations on the journey of developing the Value Toolkit with us. And it's a really exciting journey to be on. But we're delighted that we're taking the whole sector with us on that way so that no one is left behind and we're all working towards a more sustainable future. So with the lens on COP26, there is an interesting question that I've been asked repeatedly over the last couple of weeks, which is, should we be solely focusing on climate change? And it's really tempting to focus our attention on one challenge at a time, particularly when the challenges that we face around climate are so huge. But one of the things that I wanted to draw your attention to today is that the challenges that we face are really interconnected. If we want a more equitable society, we need to look at that when we're focusing at climate change. We need to understand how different areas of value relate to one another. And for me, that's absolutely critical. We need clients to recognise that in driving an outcome in one area, there may be unintended consequences in another. We need clients to optimise outcomes, but recognise that the optimising outcomes sometimes requires difficult but informed conversations around necessary trade-offs. Now, we're having these conversations all the time with clients through the Value Toolkit. It may be that a client has a really core driver around responsible sourcing of materials, but they also have a very core driver around wanting to create local economic uplift in the area that they're working in. Now, if we're having to import materials because they are more sustainable, but that means that we can't then purchase them within the local economy, that has a direct conflict. So it's really important that clients understand some of these points of tension. The Value Toolkit gives a structured mechanism to considering, articulating, and realising value. And if it's okay, I'd like to talk to you in a little bit more depth about the toolkit and our progress to date. So the image on the right-hand side of your screen, if any of you have heard about the Value Toolkit before, will be the image that is synonymous with the Value Toolkit. Quite simply put, this is a client's articulation of what value means to them for a specific intervention. That might be at project, programme, or portfolio level. And really at its heart, what the Value Toolkit is trying to do is give a pragmatic way of helping clients drive better social, environmental, and economic outcomes for every decision that they make. Quite simply, this means that we can drive better value for what we deliver and also how we deliver it. And there are two core outcomes that we're looking to drive. One is around driving a more sustainable built environment. Now, we know that the built environment has the power to change people's lives, but actually if we focus on outcomes, we can ensure that we have a more sustainable built environment that is meeting the needs of future generations. The other one is of importance to all of us in the room today. That is that we have a sustainable model for our sector moving forward. We know that things have to change. We're desperate to see that clients are focusing on more than the cost and the programme. And at best, it is cost and programme as opposed to just cost. So we're looking for a more inclusive model that really places value at the core or the centre. So if COP hasn't given you a strong enough driver as to why you need to look at value-based delivery, hopefully the next couple of slides will give you a little bit more context on that. So we know that clients are operating in increasingly difficult and complex decision-making environment. And the Value Toolkit, in essence, just gives a really structured process to help clients through that. Some of the reasons that clients are telling us that they're interested in using the Value Toolkit is that they genuinely want to optimise value for every investment decision they make, particularly in the public sector, but also increasingly in the private sector. We know that if clients are spending millions or billions of pounds, we have to make sure that there is a return on investment that is wider than the asset itself. We also know that clients, particularly in the public sector, are being repeatedly asked to justify how the investments that they're making are resulting in policy outcomes, either at a national, regional, or organisational level. And in the private sector, it's similar, but it is more focused on organisational policy that's being driven through, or sometimes investor policy. What the Value Toolkit does is create a lovely golden thread from policy all the way through to the outcomes that you're driving through your investment. And linked to that, it aligns to the construction playbook and the transforming infrastructure performance roadmap to 2030. It helps clients ensure that those are embedded within their investment decision making. And actually within the construction playbook and the TIP roadmap, you can see that the Value Toolkit is signposted too. The other area that we've really seen through piloting is that clients are using the Value Toolkit to help them have informed discussions about trade-offs, about where they might need to recognise that they can't drive outcomes across everything with a single investment. But it also helps them to protect core areas of value. Now, really simply, we've been working with the MOJ as part of our pilots. And what they did with their Value Toolkit is they took their definition of value and really simply applied a RAG status to the outcomes that were most important to them. Now, what that meant was that the programme still went through value engineering and is in the process of going through value engineering, but it enabled them to have more informed conversations about the outcomes that they were absolutely committed to protecting through that value engineering process. It's really exciting to see that the clients are using the Value Toolkit in this way. So that's client side, but what about market side? Well, we did some market research quite early on with the ACE community, but also with Constructing Excellence and the Build UK community as well, to explore how the market would respond to value-based requirements. And what the market really clearly told us was that actually what they desperately need is a common framework for defining value. They told us that procurements across organisations, but even within large-scale organisations, often have differently articulated value requirements, which means that on a market side, we're constantly reinventing the wheel to try and fit slightly different, but almost the same value requirements for clients. So part of the Value Toolkit is a value definition framework that has a 4 capitals model at its heart. Now, that has been developed by over 200 industry representatives, and it really reflects the consensus of the sector about what value means to us. If we can get clients using that value definition framework more consistently, it's much easier for the market to respond. It creates clarity and confidence. So we've moved on in being able to tell the market the pipeline that is coming down, particularly from a private sector. But actually, if we can link requirements, value-based requirements to that pipeline, what the market can do is it can innovate solutions. It can say, I can see there are key drivers in this area, so I'm going to make sure my solution is more climate focused, or is focused on resource efficiency, or is focused on enabling a more equitable society. Then we have clients and the market meeting each other's needs more effectively across the board. So a little on the policy landscape. One of the first things that we do within the Value Toolkit is we look at the policy that is driving the decision-making for the investment that we're looking at. Now, what I'm delighted to tell you is that of all the clients that we work with, I think that the Welsh policy is some of the strongest that we see. It's clearly articulated, and it's really probably one of the most structured ways that we can see that you can translate that into action through an investment. Some of the clients that we work with have incredibly complex policy landscapes, but I'd really draw you back to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act as a really great piece of policy to feed into your investment decision making. So hopefully I've convinced you now as to the why of the Value Toolkit. Why do we need value-based decision making? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking you through the what the Value Toolkit is. Now, my apologies if this is familiar to some of you already on the call, but hopefully it will be new to some of you. So I'll try and talk through at a fairly high level what the Value Toolkit is and how it works. Quite simply, the Value Toolkit is a series of integrated activities or steps supported by tools, resources and guidance, which are undertaken by a client and their project teams over the life cycle of a project or programme to ensure value-based decision making. Now, those processes and tools are underpinned by a digital platform, a web app, which we'll come back to, but really what the web app does is it just supports the methodology in being easier to deliver. Why? Well, we want to be able to help clients and industry have a more consistent approach to communicating, measuring and realising value across their projects and portfolios. Now, within the Value Toolkit and within the value definition stream in particular, we focus on a 4 capitals model. Now, I'm sure the capitals approach will be familiar to many of you, but we have worked on 4 capitals. Now, there are models that use 5 capitals, 6 capitals. I think 7 in the utility sector is the most that I've seen used. And we had lots of debate about what the right number of capitals was and what the right categories to sit within those capitals was. And we've had over 200 organisations feeding into this discussion specifically. We landed on 4 capitals being the right fit for our sector. So we look predominantly at the natural capital, which is everything you'd expect to see in environment, at human and social, which broadly covers those social value aspects, and at produced, which is much more that traditional cost, quality, efficiency triangle that you would see in any construction setting. Now, that balance of value gives a really clear articulation across a broad range of topics and areas for a client. But we feel that 4 capitals is the right amount. We've consulted with the Capitals Coalition, who are the leaders in this space, and tell us that 4 capitals is the way that the international community is moving as well. So in addition to it being right for our sector, it feels like we're future-proofing a model. Within the Value Toolkit, there are 5 integrated streams of activity. They're the how to how we deliver the Value Toolkit. The first is value definition, and we'll talk through some of these streams in more detail as we go through. There's a stream about risk, which is a real cultural stream driving cultural change within the sector. There is a stream around client approach, measurement and evaluation, and appointments. And those streams of activity work through the Value Toolkit and work together in an integrated fashion. So I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm currently showing you a diagram with so many tiny dots on that it will be impossible for many of you to read, and we'll share the integrated process map with you after the session today. But what I wanted to be able to show you was the Value Toolkit on a page, which is what this is. So the Value Toolkit itself runs all the way through an asset's life cycle. So right from the beginning of concept stage, all the way through to deciding whether the asset is still meeting its need, the Value Toolkit has a series of steps and activities that you undertake. Now, we've just all answered a really interesting question around procurement and whether procurement is fundamentally broken. And that's an interesting question in itself. And when we started out on this journey, the mandate that we'd been given from the Construction Leadership Council was to drive value-based procurement. But actually what we really quickly realised was that procurement is a really crucial tool in driving value-based delivery. But if we wait until the procurement phases, we've already eroded significant proportions of the value that we could have created in those early stages. So the Value Toolkit runs right from the earliest needs phase, and it's centred around 5 questions. So the first question is one that we're not particularly comfortable asking in our sector, but one that we need to ask more. Is there genuinely a case for change in this situation? Do we need to build anything at all? Once we've got that answer, we've got a really clear value case, the outcomes that we want to achieve. We then start looking at optioneering. So what is the preferred viable option that is closest to our definition of value? We then look at delivery. What is the preferred route to delivery, which is most applicable for the values that we've identified? Then we assess whether value is being delivered. And again, we have clients that we work with that are great at that upfront bit. They understand how to articulate what value means to them. But slowly from those early phases, it gets trickled down. That might be through value engineering, it might be through design, it might be through delivery. But actually what we see is that clients are rarely able to go back at the end of a project and say, this is what we set out to achieve, and this is what we achieved at the end of the project. The final question is around whether the asset is still meeting its need in terms of values. If it's not, then an intervention is required. If it is, then we can keep going. But what you can see here is that we can create a lovely theme of data, a thread of value, for want of a better phrase, that runs right through the earlier stages of a project, all the way through to end of life of an asset. And if we can do that, and if we can get really good at being more open and transparent in how we share our learnings, we can ensure that our investment process improves time after time, so that we really are driving the best outcomes. The final point on this is very small on the bottom, is that you will see that there is a Treasury business case linked all the way through the bottom. So the Value Toolkit as a process is mapped to the Treasury business case. It's also mapped to the REBA stages. It's also mapped to GRIP, which is now becoming PACE. So one of the things that we've tried to do is ensure that the Value Toolkit can nestle really comfortably into those existing processes and become the how of how do we drive value-based decision making. So let's pause for a moment and work through those individual activity streams to give you a bit more of an insight into what sits behind them. So value definition is by far the most recognisable, and it's probably the one that we are best at articulating. But actually the value in the Value Toolkit is that it is that integrated system that works throughout the investment life cycle. So quite simply, value definition is what value looks like for a specific intervention for a specific client. So it might be that you have a public sector client that are looking to deliver a programme of investment into new assets, and they're looking to understand the kind of outcomes that they want to drive. Now, through the value definition process, what we do is we walk clients through understanding what policy is driving their decision making. We then undertake an exercise which looks at the outcomes that they want to drive. We look at what they can influence. We look at what links back to their strategic drivers. And we look at what they have the capability and capacity to realise. Now, those outcome statements are then weighted and prioritised. So we go through an exercise where we run a structured exercise to work out how we prioritise one outcome over another, which is a really critical step, particularly if you want to protect some of those outcomes. We then go through a process of rationalizing, which essentially says, do any of these outcomes conflict with one another? Or do any of these outcomes essentially achieve the same thing? So we condense down the number of outcome statements we have. And the output is that roundel diagram that you saw on one of the previous slides with a list of weighted outcome statements. There's then a stream of activity around risk, which looks at a much broader definition of risk to say, what is the risk of me not achieving these wider outcomes? There's a stream around client approach, which in essence looks at the way the client is delivering and says, if this is what value means to us, do we have the right mechanisms in place in terms of commercial strategies, delivery models, incentivization to be able to drive that value through project delivery? And you'll see that the delivery models are really well linked back into the construction playbook. There's then a stream around measurement and evaluation, which says, if this is what value means to me as a client, do I understand how I will know if I've achieved success? What does success look like for me? Have I got the metrics? Have I got the performance ranges? Can I effectively compare options? And then finally, there's a stream around appointments, which is less an activity stream and more a guidance note that suggests the sort of teams that you might want around you as you go through every stage or phase of delivery. So it sounds like a lot, but actually when you break it down, it's a really simple process logic. What does value mean to me and my stakeholders in the context of this intervention? That's value definition. How will I know whether something meets my value definition, and can I measure it? That's measurement and evaluation. And how can I as a client shape my approach to optimize the outcomes that I'm achieving? That's client approach and risk. And then appointments runs all the way through, as you can imagine. So I've taught you through the why, I've taught you through the what, and now I'm going to talk you a little bit through the how. So how the Value Toolkit can be applied. Now, so far, we've tested the Value Toolkit on a range of public and private sector projects, buildings and infrastructure, new build, refurb and retrofit. We've really kicked the tyres, and I can confidently tell you that the Value Toolkit works across all of those different parts of the sector. It's important to note that the Value Toolkit is a facilitated process. It requires the tools and somebody that is adequately trained to be able to guide a client through each of those steps. And through the pilot phase, we've been looking at a training and assurance regime to ensure that the Value Toolkit can be applied robustly for clients. Now, we know that some clients will develop their in-house capabilities, but equally, we know that most will look to the market for support, to organisations like the members of the ACE community, to drive that value-based decision-making in partnership with them. Particularly from the core government departments, we know that they will probably create a balance where they will develop in-house capability, but they will also look to the market as well. So if I can urge you one thing of you today, it's to be prepared for this and see the opportunity from a consultancy perspective. Very quickly, the Value Toolkit works across projects, programs, and portfolios. Now, it's absolutely fair to say that through the pilot phase, we've really focused on pilot projects. Projects is by far the easiest to run the Value Toolkit through, but we've also run a number of program-based approaches as well. We're yet to deliver a portfolio-based Value Toolkit approach, but we're really hoping to do that very shortly with one of the government departments. So I don't need to pause too long on this, but I know it's often of interest, and there is this digital tool that sits behind the Value Toolkit. It's a proof of concept at the moment. It's up and running and functional, and we're just going through some client workshops to work out how we can refine it to be better for clients. Now, I mentioned that the Value Toolkit was at a really exciting phase, and it absolutely is. So we went through 18 months worth of technical development, and in April, we moved into a new phase, a pilot phase, where we looked at how we could test the Value Toolkit in anger across a huge range of projects and programs. Now, through that, we work with two groups. One is clients, who we call early adopters, and then we also have a group of practitioners who are early implementers. They are the likes of the people that will be delivering the Value Toolkit on behalf of clients as we move into a stable kind of legacy mode. Now, what you can see here is just a snapshot of some of the projects that the Value Toolkit is being tested on, both by the Construction Innovation Hubs team and also our early implementers. Through our early adopters, we've been able to work with the organisations like Manchester City Council, Bristol City Council, Kent County Council. We've got Ministry of Justice, a couple of projects with Network Rail. We're currently doing a project with defence infrastructure organisations, so a massive range. Our early implementers, there are over 140 of them, and they reflect all of the UK's major UK consultancies, as well as most of the tier 1 contractors, and then a whole range of specialist consultancies as well. It's fair to say that when we started out on this, I had assumed that we would have about 25 organisations piloting. So when we went over 140, it really demonstrated to me the appetite within the market for this change. So we aren't at the end of the pilot yet, but we're quickly getting there, and we're getting some feedback in already. So for most clients, they're telling us that the policy landscape is really complex for them, and the Value Toolkit is giving them a structured way to interpret that policy and make sure it's embedded in their project delivery. Clients are also telling us that it's helping them to build consensus. Now, one of the things that was remarkable to me for the scale of projects that we're working on is that the client teams told us that they don't often get the stakeholders in a room to define and share the outcomes that they want to create at the beginning of a project. And what they found through using the Value Toolkit is that it's setting their projects up for success. We've aligned the Value Toolkit to the Green Book, but what clients are telling us is that for the public sector is not enough. What they want to see is the Value Toolkit signposted to through the Green Book. And that's something that we're working on at the moment. We've also talked about protecting outcomes through delivery, and that's critical and requires a structure that was within the Value Toolkit. We know that clients require support on the measurement and evaluation piece in particular. So clients are really, really strong in terms of articulating what value means to them. But actually there is specialist support that is needed for that measurement and valuation stage. That might mean that clients bring in their sustainability teams, their social value teams, but for consultancies, it might also mean that if you're guiding a team through this process, you need to bring in your own sustainability and social value teams to help the client view what success really looks like and what the metric might be. The final point of learning is that it's really critical that our practitioners are well equipped from a technical perspective, but actually the training also needs to be around facilitation competence. So fundamentally, it takes an expert to be able to facilitate the conversation on behalf of the client. So that's something we're really looking at as well. Now, to be really frank, this is absolutely a movable feast, and it very much depends on the amount of technical feedback that we receive. That said, the level of technical feedback that we've received has been fairly limited, and actually the process of the Value Toolkit seems to be working pretty well at the moment. But to walk you through the steps that we're undertaking. So the pilot comes to an end at the end of November, and we're currently working on collecting that feedback. Once we have all the feedback from the pilots, we will be ensuring that we then go into a period of technical refinement. So we have a technical advisory group of industry experts who are weighting that feedback so that they can refine the Value Toolkit and give us a steer on where we need to shape or reshape our methodology, guidance, and web app. So once we've done that technical refinement, we'll go into a period of iteration where we'll refine all of the technical guidance that sits around the Value Toolkit. At the same time, we're developing all of our training content, and we hope to have our first certified facilitators ahead of launching the Value Toolkit at the end of spring. We'll have our finalised outputs by then as well. Now, underneath the bottom of all of this, you will see that we are just about to start the process of developing a flex standard. Now, what that means is that the methodology that sits behind the Value Toolkit will be moved into a flex standard that can be iterated and will evolve over time, but it sets that methodology in stone in a way that industry can take it and move it forward in a consistent way. So hopefully I've articulated to you that we are at a really exciting time for the Value Toolkit. The momentum is there, the interest from clients is there, and what we really need is the consultants stepping into the place to help their clients through this process. Thanks, Piers.
Thank you, Ellie. That was amazing and really, really interesting. From my perspective, I think certainly preaching to the converted as a business, we're signed up as early adopters. It really is a valuable tool. We're trying to pilot it with Welsh Government. It's designed to achieve the outcomes that we need, and it feels as if it should be a quick win for our sector. I feel quite passionate that it's something that we should be really trying to drive within our clients. And the opportunity, just reflecting on some of the comments that you've offered, Ellie, but the opportunity that it presents for us as a consultancy sector, that's huge. And the potential to support the right sustainable outcomes that we really want, and importantly, the link to a sustainable model for our industry. So not only achieving the outcomes that we want, but also supporting the industry that we're all part of. And I think that is a really important takeaway. So sincere thanks for joining us and supporting us, and look forward to discussing some of that further with you in the panel debate. Thanks, Ellie. Before I introduce our next speaker, Julian Hetherington, I think we have another straw poll, Chetna, which really is challenging us to offer an opinion as to what the audience consider is most likely to stimulate the social and environmental outcomes that we desire. Do we consider that that's a matter for government regulation and legislation, or do we think it's more important that we have that all-important public and private sector investment community alignment? Is that more important, or do we need both? So it's an important question, I think, and certainly please encourage you all to contribute to that. I think we've started to get some questions coming in through the chat, and if I can just encourage everybody, if you do have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I don't know if our results are going to come, so let's take a look at this. I think that is an interesting result, and the resounding majority, nearly 2/3 of our participants, thinking that both are equally important. If I'm honest, that chimes with my own thoughts on the matter. Again, we can debate that further with our panelists once we've heard from them all. Our next speaker is Julian Hetherington. He's the Automotive Transformation Director at the Advanced Propulsion Centre in the UK. He's a passionate advocate for the UK automotive industry, which he has been an integral part of for over 30 years, involved in all manner of different aspects of the automotive industry, from program and portfolio management through to operation, through to he was 20 years with Jaguar Land Rover, most recently as the globalization program director for them. Julian is going to talk to us about decarbonising our road transport infrastructure, which is a really pressing, important issue, not least particularly here in Wales at the minute. We all really look forward to hearing from you, Julian. And if I can invite you to take to the stage, please.
Thank you, Piers, and good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen any second now. Just a quick check. Good, thank you. I'd like to think of this as being a little bit of a worked example, really on the challenges that we're facing. And I'm going to start by posing the question on the slide here. Is this really a significant challenge, a big hurdle to be overcome, or is it a great and fantastic opportunity for us to kind of reset our ambition and seize this fantastic opportunity? And we're going to come back to that question at the end, if we may. I'd just like to take stock of what we've got in the industry today and set some context. The industry really matters to the UK. It's a big industry. It employs around 160,000 people in manufacturing alone. And if you look at the invested assets, even at depreciated values, just for the top companies, actually you get to an invested asset base well in excess of 20 billion. It's the largest exporter of manufactured goods to China. And it's the second largest sector when it comes to investment in R&D. And we know that R&D is sticky, and that R&D then translates into later economic and societal benefits, as well as creating high-value jobs in the UK's economy. So in a nutshell, this industry matters, and we need to take it seriously, and we need to think about some of the challenges that it faces as we go through what is probably the most remarkable technological transition that the industry has faced for over 100 years, in moving away from carbon fuel based vehicle propulsion systems through to those that can deliver zero emissions at the tailpipe, and as a system help us get towards net zero. And that is the big challenge that we have to face, and the great opportunity that we can seize as we look forward, moving from tailpipe emissions through to net zero. So just a very brief introduction to the Advanced Propulsion Centre. I mean, we're a not-for-profit organisation that's been around for about 7 or 8 years now, and it came out of an initiative from government and also the Automotive Council. And we've been supporting effectively as the front door and a delivery partner for government, a number of projects in the R&D space for low carbon propulsion technologies. And over those 7 or 8 years, we have managed to place the government funding and support projects worth over £1.2 billion. And they have been delivering some results. Over 1 million vehicles on the UK's roads have adopted technologies that were supported through these projects. And they've saved so far around 260 million tonnes of CO2. And over 50,000 jobs have been safeguarded or created as part of that process. Now, we've had some really great feedback around the programmes, and that's helped us transition into a new phase where we're thinking about how we move beyond R&D and towards industrialisation, so that we can really make use of that stickiness of R&D and translate it into the UK's economy. And it's also part of this big push to move from focusing on the technologies embedded on the vehicle, which are around delivering zero tailpipe emissions, to the concept of net zero, because we have to recognize that when an electric vehicle today, on average around the world, comes out of the production line, it's probably got more than twice the CO2 emissions embedded in it that you would see if a petrol or a diesel vehicle were to roll off that same production line, because of the materials and the technologies and the processes that are involved in making it. So you start at a disadvantage. The good news is that if you plug it into renewable electricity sources, then actually you relatively quickly overhaul that initial disadvantage. But we can't afford to start with a disadvantage in a net zero environment. And that's our challenge and our opportunity. And we're starting to develop that. And this brings great economic as well as societal benefits. So just a little bit about the why and a bit of context. And I'm going to use as a bit of an example batteries. Batteries are very much in vogue at the moment. Everyone's talking about gigafactories, because these are the things that are really a bit of a bellwether for how the industry is transitioning. And it represents the huge challenge, because what we're fundamentally doing with batteries is that we are taking what is a fairly simple and cheap plastic container that you put fuel in today, and we're replacing it with something that can cost tens of thousands of pounds, effectively something that is an energy storage device. And that's a lot more expensive, and it changes the fundamental balance of what we need to do and where the technology lies. Electric motors and power electronics and other things that are important systems on electric vehicles are also significant, but we are effectively moving away from something where the UK has a really significant strength and is overexposed, and that is internal combustion engine technology and manufacturing. We're a big exporter, a big net exporter of internal combustion engines to other locations around the world. So we need something to replace that economic value add as well. And we need this manufacturing capacity also because of things like the free trade agreement, the trade and cooperation agreement with the European Union. That was signed on Christmas Eve last year, and it also brought in with it some rules of origin requirements associated with electric vehicles, trying to drive some industrialization of these technologies in the wider European region. And we must recognize that it's a bilateral agreement with the same terms on rules of origin for finished vehicles going from the UK to Europe and vice versa. And it's really important that we maintain this free market, because we have some facilities in the UK where over half their output is actually exported to the European Union, and we can't afford to lose that or be disadvantaged with duties. So we must comply with these rules of origin, and that has some specific rules in it around which materials, which value of materials need to be made within the region. If I just look at lithium ion batteries, we have a bit of a head start in the UK, but we've fallen behind. And I'll come on to why we've fallen behind in a second. But the lithium ion battery was invented in the UK. We had Europe's first gigafactory. It's the one that's supporting Nissan. It's run by a company called AESC, Envision AESC, and it's been producing batteries there for 9 years. It has a capacity of 1.9 gigawatt hours of battery a year. We are a long way off the capacity that we need by 2030. But what happened in the intervening period is we've seen significant investment in battery manufacturing locally, away from the really dominant nations in Asia where this technology has been industrialized. We're starting to see that come into Western Europe as well as Eastern Europe. And things have changed a little bit in that in 2019, in October, the Prime Minister announced his intent to create something to try and incentivize and re-anchor the technologies associated with electric vehicles in the UK, to create that centre of gravity, to help us recover some of the ground that we had lost over the preceding years. And that was followed through with the launch of the Automotive Transformation Fund in July of 2020. And we now have the right fundamentals. I'll come on to that shortly. But let's just think about a few things that may have gone wrong in that intervening period. We're talking about big investment projects here. We're not talking about tinkering around the edges of existing factories. We're talking about building big stuff new. And when I talk about big stuff, I'm talking about things that are 1, 2, maybe £3 billion and up in investment. So these are investments that have got a risk profile. And when you look at any investor's view, they're going to be thinking about, how can I mitigate those risks? Have I got the right demand in this territory? Am I working and supplying in a closed market, or can I access a bigger market? Can I get the right funding? Can I build something that is, that is an investable proposition? Can I deliver the project on time? Is it time deterministic, or are there going to be unforeseen impediments that I just don't know whether I'm going to deliver it on time? And I'll tell you, anybody with experience of the car business knows that if you haven't got a time deterministic project, you are in real trouble, because that carries a lot of risk. You get it wrong, you are late. At best, it costs you a lot of money, and at worst, you go bust, right? Because these programs have got huge leverage, and you need to be on time. Now, we've had a few challenges. There was a lot of investment hold off in the post-Brexit vote period, because we didn't know, frankly, what that trading situation was going to be with our friends in Europe. And so a lot of that upstream investment slipped. And when you are an investor in these big bits of kit, you're going to go for the best balance of risk and return. And if you've got a much bigger market with no trading relationship risk, called the EU 27, versus what, until we got the trade deal in place at the end of last year, would have been potentially a closed or a bound market in terms of logistics costs, and also potentially tariffs, until that was sorted, I think I know which decision I would have made. But we're in a different ballgame now, and we've got the right fundamentals. Now, there are some other things that have really helped, and that we've seen some cementing and really quite forward-thinking policies start to emerge. Firstly, there were the announcements around 2030, 2035 with the ban of petrol and diesel-powered passenger cars and light vehicles in 2030, and for PHEVs in 2035. We've seen significant shift in consumer attitudes, and we've also seen, as a response, the automakers in the UK and around the world really start to react, and they've adapted and changed significantly, in some cases completely changed their cycle plans in terms of future products and the propulsion technologies that they propose to adopt. So that has now really started to crystallize what is an emergingly very strong demand picture for these electrified vehicle commodities. Now, just thinking about policies, this is kind of something where you need a bit of a carrot and a bit of a stick. So we've got the regulatory requirements, make it more difficult and more expensive to make petrol and diesel vehicles, outlaw them at an end point, a long stop date. But you also need consumer uptake incentives. And this is where, through OZEV, consumer-related charging grants and significant investment in charging infrastructure have really started to play. I've been driving an electric vehicle for about 18 months now, and I've got to tell you, over that 18 months, it's changed a lot. It used to be really frustrating trying to find somewhere to charge, but actually, I regularly do quite long distances. It's actually now much more straightforward to use that infrastructure, and charging is becoming faster and more available every month. So that is really helping, and we have seen a remarkable shift in consumer propensity to buy electric vehicles. And I've got to tell you, in the UK and in Europe, the Tesla Model 3 which is a pure EV, was the best-selling car last month. So this is not something that we can ignore. The shift is happening, and it's happening fast. Just want to give you a bit of an idea of how fast that's changing. If we look at the left-hand diagram, last year, about February, March, we were thinking that we'd need about 64 gigawatt hour of battery manufacturing capacity in the UK, just for passenger car and light vehicles. By February of this year, we'd upped that to about 90 gigawatt hour. on the basis of some of those early policy announcements. But actually, we now think by the time we update our forecast in January or February of next year, it's likely to be somewhere between 100 and 120. It's gaining momentum. And we are not insignificant. If we just look at our own domestic consumption, we are already looking like about 11% of the total wider European region demand. And that itself is growing. But we have a problem. This is new tech and it requires big investments. And if I just look at the right-hand chart, the top of the stack is where our analysis aligns pretty much with Volkswagen's analysis as an example, to say that Europe is probably going to need about 800 gigawatt hour of manufacturing capacity by 2030. But we have currently only got line of sight with a trajectory that says we're probably going to be about 200 gigawatt hours short. So we can't rely on our friends in Europe to supply the UK with batteries, nor can we rely, because of the arrangements around rule of origin and the tariffs, on importing batteries at such scale from capacity that exists in Asia. If we transitioned, here's a bit of a thought, if we transitioned every single vehicle that is made in Europe today from petrol to battery electric by 2030, we would need 1.8 terawatt hours of battery manufacturing capacity. So double what you see on this page and more. That's quite scary. And there is a lot of value in these things. These are not swappable components. They're not kind of like your average Duracell. Other brands are available. These are items that have got specific characteristics and are often co-developed with vehicle manufacturers. Now, just looking at the value, this was based on our 64 gigawatt hour forecast last year. We thought there'd be about £12 billion of market opportunity in the UK. So you can probably multiply that by 1.5 now, looking at these numbers. But there are some other areas where the UK has an entitlement to play, a competitive entitlement, because of our strength in R&D and our manufacturing capability as well. South Wales, a classic example with power electronics, with that cluster. And we've got some fantastic clusters in the northeast and in Oxfordshire and 1 or 2 other places around electric motors, where we are really leading the field. So much so that actually we're seeing foreign investors come in and try and buy into that innovation and that technology from the UK. But if we look at batteries, actually only about 20% of it, in terms of the ex-works cost, is associated with the conversion cost of making the battery. The other 80% or so is input materials. And those input materials have got some interesting materials in them, like nickel, a bit of cobalt in many cases, manganese, lithium. And we're seeing these input materials actually have attendant consequences as the use changes. Lithium is a classic example. Just 5 years ago, 2/3 of lithium use was in pharmaceuticals and in desiccants, only 1/3 around batteries. In 2020, it had completely inverted. More than 2/3 was associated with batteries. Nickel today, primarily associated with steels and aerospace. Now it's really shifting towards battery use. And guess what? All of these upstream materials have got long lead times when it comes to not only building the processing technology, but the refining capability, and that takes longer than building a battery factory. And then you go further upstream and you've got to get this material out of the ground, and those mining resources can take 10 years or more to bring on stream. So we have to think ahead. We can't rely on just asking the supplier for a bit more, because next month they won't have it unless we've helped them plan ahead. And that also brings us on to a bit of an ethical and a moral question here, in that many of these materials need to come from locations outside of the UK. Some we can source in the UK. Lithium is a great example. We're looking at a project, supporting a project to take lithium brines out of Cornwall, an area with historical mining capability and skills, and reduce an awful lot of potential environmental impacts. And that has the potential also to generate electricity through geothermal power. And these are the areas where, if we think about the closed materials economy and the closed energy economy, we can build batteries that are net zero. Graphite is another classic example. Much of the feedstock comes out of petrochemical industries, out of Immingham, from a company called Phillips 66, and then goes all the way across the world to China and is converted into synthetic graphite for anode material using coal-powered electricity, and it emits some CO2 as an off-gas in the process. And then it comes all the way back to get built into batteries, with about 20,000 logistics miles and a heap of dirty electricity and lots of CO2 emitted in the process. What if we were to do something like convert that material in the UK using some fancy new tech, take the off gases and put them in carbon capture and storage, use green electricity to do it, and then we can have net zero synthetic graphite. This is how we can move the needle. And these are the great opportunities, the competitive entitlement, if you like, for the UK. And they address many of those ethical questions as well about increasing uptake of electric transport solutions, because they do come with consequences. And we cannot be confident that if we just allow those processes to happen overseas in that upstream supply chain, that they will have the same ESG values that we have in the UK. We risk exporting pollution and emissions overseas. If we do it here, we can be sure. And that's our great opportunity and challenge. So what do we need to do to unlock these investments? Well, essentially, we need to reduce the risk, and we need to make not just building things here, but also operating here quite low risk. And I mentioned at the start, time determinism is really key. For large capital projects to support vehicle launch dates, and really timing trumps everything almost except long-term operating cost. And we need a planning process that is expedient and time deterministic. There are factories to make batteries being built all over the world, some of them actually in Western Europe, that are built and ready to operate, but they don't have permits. That's really risky. We have a track record in the UK, actually. There are 2 large-scale battery factories in the UK that managed to, because they picked the right place, get through the planning process in under 90 days, from initial application through to full planning consent. That's step 1. That really helps with time determinism. Step 2 is then going through the subsequent operating permits. And these facilities, do come with some operating risks, so they fall into the upper tier of the COMA regulations. And we've got to think about how the other competent authorities that have to issue these permits actually can resource up for these very large-scale projects that the UK has not seen before, and make sure that we can be expedient and plan them well. And we need infrastructure. Many of these facilities need lots of power, and they need large connections, 200 MVA plus for a battery factory. This is not insubstantial, about the size of a small city's use, and you don't find those on every street corner. You can't just put a plug in, so you have to plan this ahead. And this is where, working closely with National Grid and with other planning bodies, we need to make sure that that infrastructure could be made available. So we need to do our homework. So that really is a bit of a nutshell of kind of what we're trying to achieve. And just to reflect back on this snapshot of the UK, we are a bit different from the rest of the European industry in that we do have some specialist manufacturers. We focus not just on volume plays, but also premium, luxury, specialist, off-highway, heavy haul mining, JCBs, for example, and loaders. We've got the whole gamut. And many of them have got specialist requirements, and that's why we do need those unique needs to be satisfied with the domestic industry, because we can't just buy your average Duracell battery. They have to be somewhat bespoke to our needs. And we've now got to a point where we do have the right fundamentals. And I have to tell you, we have seen a remarkable shift in investment propensity over the last 12 months, as it has become clear that we have a great tax environment to support investment with initiatives like the super deduction announced in the budget earlier this year. We have the great skills availability in the UK, as well as universities. We've got the great technical skills program and apprenticeship schemes. And we're actually not bad at infrastructure. Yeah, we might not be the quickest always, but we do have very reliable and resilient infrastructure. and we are on a very fast decarbonisation track for power, which is very important for many of these. And we've been doing some homework ahead of time in terms of researching sites as well, working very closely with colleagues in DIT. So just very briefly, a bit more about the Automotive Transformation Fund as an example of the carrot, if you like, in this space. We launched it in July of last year, and over £850 million, including an additional 350 that was released just a couple of weeks ago by the Chancellor. This helps us support these large-scale capital investments in the UK to help with some of those early costs and to make sure that they land in the UK and not elsewhere, to give us that capacity that is needed to not just look at the top of the food chain, but also the extended supply chains, including things like recycling, to help us move towards a closed materials economy, and also where we can extract those minerals usefully and in an environmentally friendly way from the UK. And it gives us visibility of that supply chain as well. None of us wants to see the difficulties that the industry has today repeated, and I'm talking perhaps about the semiconductor shortage, which has really crucified the industry. We need visibility so that we can plan for these new investments. So we've got some big successes. Just to finish, just give you an idea that we do actually think we're making some significant progress. We've got, as I say, 2 large-scale factories for batteries already out of the box, with a large-scale facility up at Sunderland, and Britishvolt, with a speculative investment, have started work already at their facility in Blyth, which will use lots of offshore wind energy to make batteries. And we're also looking at those upstream materials with projects such as Pensano. And looking at other areas, I'm glad to say that recently we were able to help the Ford transmission plant at Halewood, which is a technology that will not be needed with electric vehicles, actually plan to transition to make electric drive units over the coming years. So it secures a future for that facility that employs around 500 people today. So we've got lots of reasons to be optimistic. And I'd just like to come back to the question I posed at the start. Is this a big challenge, or is this a fantastic opportunity? And actually, I think it's a great opportunity for us to reset our ambitions and get out of the paradigm, which is, if you want to make something, do it somewhere else. Actually, in the UK, we can truly be competitive in this space. And these large-scale investments are really evidence that that is the case. So thanks very much. And I shall now pass back to Piers.
Thanks, Julian. It really was fascinating. I made a note of exactly your opening gambit, a significant challenge or a fantastic opportunity to reset our ambition, and I think it really is. We are delighted to say that Sophie Howe is joining us. Commitment to the cause. Sophie is stood outside COP26 in Glasgow, connecting via 4G and 5G. So Sophie, we have a polling question which we will skip, so we'll head straight to you. We do appreciate your support. Sophie is the Future Commissioner for the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, a post that is unique to Wales. Sophie has an extensive background in public service and particular interests in equality and diversity. We are privileged to have Sophie with us, and I'm just going to hand directly to you, Sophie, because it must be a significant challenge trying to chat to us. So over to you.
Diolch yn fawr, noswaith dda pawb. Good evening, everyone, from a fairly icy Glasgow, where we've just been asked to leave the green zone at COP because it's about to shut down. Starting with where we are in terms of why we're here at COP in Glasgow, discussing let's call it a climate catastrophe. The reason why we're here discussing a climate catastrophe is because short-term decision-making, short-term politics, short-term budget cycles are endemic in our systems of governance across the world. And the reason why we're in the middle of this climate crisis is because we failed to act in the long term. Let's just put into context, if I could have the next slide, please, where we are in terms of where we're headed at the moment, and we'll see what happens by the end of the week here in Glasgow. Currently heading for about 2.7 degrees of warming. And, despite the platitudes, despite the strategies and policies that have been promised, that is where we are. So way off really what our aspirations were in terms of the Paris commitment. And if you read some of the analysis that is coming out of the draft agreement, we still have a long, long way to go. Putting that into context in Wales, I think it's always important to create a vision of the Wales and the world that we want to leave behind to future generations. And here's some imagery from our vision, a future generations vision for Wales. It's an image of active travel, of connected communities, of a low carbon society. It's an image where people's health and well-being is at the forefront of what we do and how we focus on delivering policy. I'm hoping that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act won't be new to most of you, but just to put that kind of overarching principle out there, that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act requires our decision makers in Wales, the 44 public institutions covered by the Act, to demonstrate how they're acting in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It also sets out then 7 national wellbeing goals. And I always say you wouldn't think it was revolutionary for a country to have a set of long-term goals. I think if you ask the average sort of person, how does politics and governance get done? You'd think, it's fairly sensible to have a set of long-term goals. But these generally don't exist in most nations. The closest that we have to it internationally are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what you see here are distilled down to 7 from the 17 SDGs, 7 wellbeing goals in Wales, is our long-term mission. How will we achieve this long-term mission? Well, there are 5 ways of working in the legislation, which are making sure that we plan for the long term, recognise future trends and scenarios. And I have some real concern generally about how we do that. I've talked about the climate catastrophe, but even where our intentions are good ones in terms of solving current problems, I'm going to talk a little bit about the connection between race and climate justice in a moment. How often do we think about what that connection is, and how often are we thinking about that in the long term? So where we're trying to solve problems in the short term, such as addressing racial inequality, such as addressing gender inequality, for example, we're only generally thinking about what those problems might be at the moment, or what they are at the moment. We're not thinking about what future trends and scenarios might mean to them. We're not thinking about the fact that actually, if you're from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic community or a poor community, you are likely to be least responsible for climate change, but most affected by it. And that's both the case in our communities here in the UK, and also on an international level in terms of those of us in the global south, the global north, our white populations are doing most of the harm, which is being affected and being felt by those Black communities in the global south. And so we need to be thinking about how those long-term trends are actually playing out in the way that we do public policy and the different types of people that it's affecting. That brings me on to integration. That's exactly it. I think for too long, we've operated within a kind of silo mentality. And our Future Generations Act requires us to think holistically, to choose to do the things that make the biggest positive contribution across each of those 7 wellbeing goals, and avoid doing the things that have negative consequences to different aspects of our well-being. So it requires us to think about the links between climate change and health. It requires us to think, if our aspiration is to decarbonise a transportation system, which of course it is, the ways in which we go about doing those sorts of things need to be considered across each of our 7 wellbeing goals. I just heard the end of the last presentation talking about electric vehicle infrastructure and so on. If our sole mission is to decarbonise the transportation system, mass investment in EV is probably a sensible solution. If, however, our goals are to decarbonise the transportation system whilst tackling inequality, whilst improving people's health and whilst creating connected communities, actually EVs are probably not the main solution that we should be following. A much better solution would be to invest in public transport and active travel, which has more scope to help in terms of addressing the obesity crisis, keeping people well, connecting our communities so that we're all chatting whilst we're waiting for the bus rather than sitting in congested roads in our electric vehicles rather than our diesel vehicles. And of course, those are just the people who can afford to buy those electric vehicles. So the point that I'm making here is what we need to do in terms of securing our future is we need to look at things in an interconnected way. We need to consider what we need to do and then how we should go about doing that to drive the biggest benefits across all aspects of well-being. I want to say a little bit about the impact that the Future Generations Act is making, and I'm hoping that some of you will have seen or felt this in your areas of work. You will know that we've created a climate ministry where environment, energy, housing, planning and transport portfolios are all integrated. Again, all critically important. And when we just talk about the climate or the nature emergencies, it's almost like that kind of exists as a thing in isolation, and that it's kind of disconnected sometimes from what the housing minister is doing and how the housing minister requires homes in Wales to be built. It's like it's somehow disconnected from how we plan and design the communities that we're going to live in. It's like it's somehow disconnected from the decisions that we take on transport. And that's why this climate change ministry, bringing all of those things together, is so important. And of course, we're seeing some brave, also some unpopular, because they are brave, decisions coming from the Welsh Government in line with the climate emergency. So the fact that the sort of moratorium or the review of road building in Wales is underway, looking at already committee or schemes that have already been given a green light, and pausing those schemes to reassess them in light of the climate emergency. And that may not be popular with some communities and some people, but that is a necessary and brave decision that the government need to take. We're also doing some quite radical things around waste, so a beyond recycling strategy and a commitment to make Wales a zero waste nation by 2050. This strategy in itself is quite interesting for the reasons that I just talked about around integration. If you look at that strategy, they've started from the perspective of how do we become a zero waste nation by 2050, but have applied the lens of how do we do that in a way which tackles socioeconomic disadvantage, which tackles poverty, which brings communities together. And so you'll see that some of the approaches in that strategy are, yes, about using innovation, yes, about big macro responses around a circular economy, but they're actually about local community responses too. So the rollout of the programme called Benthyg, which if you don't know is Welsh for borrow, so repair cafes and the library of things, so that we're trying to connect communities whilst also reducing waste. Where you go and take your household appliances to a repair cafe to be fixed, you can also be coming together, talking with people in your community. It might be part of the solution to address the loneliness and isolation epidemic that we have facing us here in the UK. Doing that, reusing, repairing, reusing, might also be a solution to addressing socioeconomic disadvantage. And likewise, Benthyg, the library of things, it's about finding new models of doing better things to reduce waste. So the fact that we all have our sheds and garages full of things that we possibly only use once a month or sometimes once a year, our lawn mowers, our paint strippers, all of these things, actually we could be borrowing those things as part of a community. So sometimes I think we try to focus on future challenges by thinking the answer and to get us out of this oh, sorry, something's happened to the sound, by saying that the answer to get us out of this is to find technological solutions. And yes, it is about finding technological solutions, but it's also sometimes about going back to those connections between the importance of community. Sorry, I can hear you. Sorry. Sorry, I'm not sure how much of that you heard. I'm not sure whether you're getting the slides still up here. No, we've lost the slides, and this is another reason why we shouldn't just rely on technological solutions. I want to end by saying that I think that certainly what we need to make the changes that we need to see for a low carbon future in Wales, for a future which focuses on the health of our nation, on creating cohesive communities, and on addressing socioeconomic disadvantage, is we need a change in mindset. So that means that actually we need to be involving and engaging unusual suspects. The engineers need to be talking to the creatives need to be engaging with communities need to be talking with politicians, because collectively we will challenge each other to think in different ways. And that's really what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is all about. I think we can be proud of what we've done here in Wales so far. I think we can be really proud that other countries are following our lead. And in fact, over the last few weeks, the United Nations Secretary General has announced that he will follow Wales's lead at a UN level, with the appointment of a UN Special Envoy for Future Generations, reforms to the governance infrastructure of the United Nations to embed future generations thinking, and a future summit in 2023. And earlier on, during my time at COP, I met with the Scottish minister who has been tasked with taking the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act through the Scottish Parliament. Just today, the UK Future Generations Bill passed through a committee stage in the House of Lords. So I think that the Future Generations agenda that Wales has been absolutely at the forefront of really can provide thought leadership to the rest of the world, if we can embrace it and not just talk the talk, but walk the walk too in Wales. And that will require every single one of us to be part of walking that walk. Then I think we can show the world how it can reform its systems of governance, of politics, and of decision making in the interests of future generations. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties that I've had this evening. I'm sorry that maybe you can't see me particularly well here in the darkness, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you.
Sophie, thank you so much. Congratulations. Amazing technology allowed that to happen. Thank you for supporting us. Clearly, I can see not that easy for you. If you're okay to hang on the line for a few moments, I would like to pose just at least one question to you. We do have a panel debate now with our other panelists, and you're very welcome to stay, but equally we completely understand if it's maybe easier for you not to. But one of our earlier speakers spoke articulately about value and about value-based decision making, which is clearly the key theme of our conference this year. There's a tool called the Value Toolkit. It is being piloted in Wales. It's particularly suited, I think, to embedding the rich policy framework within Wales, within procurement decisions. And I just wanted to invite you to talk to that as a concept and reflect on the importance of ensuring that value in its truest sense is reflected in our procurement policy and the decisions we take. Could I ask you to comment to that, Sophie?
Well, it's absolutely what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is all about. It's about fundamentally transforming the things that we value. And generally, the answer to most questions that we've posed, whether that's what should we spend our money on as a government, or what policies should we take forward as a government, what should we buy if we need to procure goods and services, is to do the thing that either costs us the least money or makes us the most money. So it's been centred around money, and our economic system, I think, is completely failing, where you've got the same amount of wealth concentrated in the hands of 60 odd people as you have in the 3.6 billion poorest people, and we've got this sort of planetary destruction. So if that is not a massive call for a change in the way we think about our economy, we think about the way we do public policy, and we think about what we value, I don't know what is. There are some really complex issues in terms of how we drive that through the procurement system, and I've recently done a big review into procurement, which raises a whole range of problems, from the complex landscape that people are trying to operate within, the fact that the procurement profession itself is pretty beleaguered. They've had lots of cuts and they don't have enough resources. The fact that procurement has been seen as a backroom function rather than a boardroom function, and the fact that the public sector are not that good at working in collaboration with the private sector to find new and innovative solutions. So all of those things are things that I think need to be addressed in Wales. The Future Generations Act, we're lucky. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It provides the framework for us to do that, and sets out exactly in law what we should value. We just need to support our professional services to make sure that they're able to enact that properly.
Thank you, Sophie. And I think that resonates really strongly with myself, and I'm sure with ACE members as well, allowing us to deliver projects. An opening gambit that I made is doing nothing is not the answer. It's about what we do and making sure that we do things in the right way, in a sustainable manner, one that is sympathetic with our future generations. So what I will do in a minute is bring back all of our other speakers, and as I say, you're very welcome to continue with us, Sophie, or we understand if you want to slip away. That is entirely up to you.
I think we've now got some lovely police officers who are trying to move us on from here, so I think I'll probably have to leave you, but thank you for putting up with the disruption and let me join you this evening.
No, we appreciate your support and thank you for going to the effort. Thanks, Sophie.
Okay.
Cheers. Take care. Chetna, I don't know if you can bring back our other panelists. I think that is certainly commitment to the cause, and we appreciate Sophie joining us. And the long-termism and the interconnected nature of what we're talking about, I think that is fundamentally really important to a successful future. And I think in one way or another, it's been touched on by both of you. If you're happy moving on to questions, I'll start with perhaps a soft question, whether domestically in your own lives at home with your own families, is climate change making a difference to the decisions that you take? Can I invite Ellie perhaps to answer that one?
Of course, yeah. So I can give you a very personal view, Piers. I have two relatively small children, an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. What's really interesting to me is that both of them are very cognizant of the environmental challenges that we face, and quite articulate in being able to pull me up when they feel that I'm falling short on my use of plastic or my desire to use the car in the rain, and tell me that I need to take an alternative. And I think we really have to look to the next generation. If ever we feel like we're not driving the right change, we look to them, and they have to be our inspiration. But equally, I think we've got a bright future ahead of us if it's young people like that are already committed to more value-based ways of living. It's only a positive sign, isn't it?
Thanks, Ellie. And from my own perspective, I would concur with that. I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they get brownie points if we walk to school rather than going in the car, and they know about deforestation, and it's quite incredible, and reflect also on our own staff here as a business and the passion that exists within the younger members of the team to ensure that we're doing the right things in terms of decarbonisation. It really is inspiring. Julian, I don't know if you have any thoughts in terms of your own sort of domestic life.
Yeah, actually quite a bit. I mean, you know, as well as making the switch towards electrified vehicles, actually I've always been pretty fastidious about things like you know, LED lighting or low energy lighting, and as we were sort of chatting earlier, actually chasing the family around the house, turning off lights in unoccupied rooms, which I think Ellie might discover when her children get a little bit older and they can reach the light switches. They seem to only operate in one direction. But actually, I think in terms of diet and many of the things that we do, you know, switching out of some of the things that actually, the more we think about it, we understand more of that upstream supply chain. You know, where does meat come from in some cases? You know, what are the greenhouse gas effects of cows in particular? So we're certainly eating a lot less meat, and we're traveling a lot less than we were. So there's a fair bit happening in the Hetherington household too.
I think change is happening, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, my two daughters are a bit older than Ellie's actually, and they've both got their own houses now. But actually, neither of them will buy products, particularly food products, that are packaged in plastics. They are really quite fastidious about it.
That fires us all with optimism for the future. If I'm going to take some of the questions from the chat now, some of which are really interesting. There was one that leapt out to me, which I'm going to find. Right. Perhaps if I try and paraphrase it, is a key drive towards electric vehicles, and perhaps frame this with Julian first, which in essence is a good thing. We've seen through development of other technology the kind of inherent obsolescence that starts to be created as we get better and better at what a particular piece of technology it is, whether that's mobile phones or computers. Are we building in any of those potential obsolescences now that will push a problem down the line? And this idea around commercial viability, and we know, what are we on? We're on iPhone 11 or iPhone 12, you know, and that kind of consumer demand for new cars and new technologies. Could you talk to that for us? Because that's quite interesting.
Yeah, certainly. But by the way, I'm doing my bit, and I'm stretching the life of my iPhone 7, so I'm, you know, quite a few generations behind. I think actually, you know, buy well and buy once. But if you look at the car, actually, the car as an entity is pretty recyclable, and historically has been driven, you know, out of economics as well as regulation. So 85% of a vehicle by weight is already driven by the End of Life Vehicle Directive. And the sector has got some specific legislation that says, you know, actually the producer has the end of life responsibility, and that extends to all of the materials. So it's been really focused on this, as well as trying to produce vehicles that have got a level of durability that last in the design life of the car. The average car age at retirement in the UK is about 12 years. So they're pretty durable products as they are. Now, as we're shifting, quite a lot of the weight in a car is, in most cars, steel, big heavy lump of an engine or aluminium, and you've got a body. And actually, we're moving to lighter technologies and different technologies. So actually, by weight, we've got a bigger challenge, because we've got more materials that are more difficult to recover, potentially more expensive to recover, but perhaps might have higher inherent value.
Yes.
And for example, just looking at batteries, there's regulations coming into force that will require you to use a level of recycled material. So actually, you look at electric vehicles, they fundamentally require less servicing.
Yeah.
You're looking at running gear and brakes. That's about it. So you're going to be using fewer consumables during the product's life. Actually, they're proving to be much more durable than the initial design life suggested. So a consequence is that they're likely to last quite a bit longer. And because they contain valuable materials, the level of recycling and materials recovery is likely to be very high. So in and of itself, I don't really see a problem with some inherent obsolescence in the technology, because we can recover with good economic benefit those materials contained.
That's very interesting, isn't it? And again, plays towards sustainability and the recoverability of that material, given the perceived environmental concerns around the sort of front end stimulus. So that's really interesting and again encouraging. Thanks, Julian. I'm going to find a question for Ellie now, and I saw one that struck a chord earlier. If I can just find it. In fact, there's two that I've seen. There's one here. You spoke about the four capitals model: produce, natural, social, and human, and how that had been mapped for our industry. Has it been mapped for other sectors? And if so, how different are they?
It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
The organisation that is behind the Value Toolkit is an organisation called the Construction Innovation Hub, which is publicly funded to drive change within the construction and infrastructure sectors. So our remit has been quite specific in terms of where we're looking at. Now, there's probably two answers to the question. One is that the capitals model more broadly is working across all sorts of sectors. So it's used within manufacturing, it's used within food, it's used within mining. So a whole broad range of sectors. In terms of the four capitals model that we've developed, it's less about the number of capitals and more about the categories that sit within those capitals as to how applicable it is to other sectors. But there are two that we're exploring at the moment. One is how the four capitals model that we've developed could be used to support innovation funding decision making. And the other one is around defence more broadly. Now, there is a really strategic reason why we are mapping the Value Toolkit's value definition framework to defence. And that is because if we seek signposting from the Green Book, we need to be able to demonstrate to Treasury that it can work, and an IPA, that it can work across all of their portfolio areas. And from IPA's perspective, one of their biggest areas is around broader defence. So we're at this point in time going through a process of working with the defence sector through the Capitals Coalition to say, how closely is this aligned to your needs? Is there anything that you need to change? So what I'd say is, if it's defence that you're asking about specifically, check back with me in a couple of months and I'll be able to give you a much more detailed answer to that question.
That sounds great. One of my own observations around the Value Toolkit would be its applicability to almost any set of circumstances, and ability to be able to use it with other tools. So in our industry, there's lots of, if we want to use the term, procurement tools that are out there, whether that's something like social value TOMs or something like that. But actually, the Value Toolkit can be used with all those things. It's not one or the other. They can be synonymous with each other. So yeah, I think it's a really good thing. You can bring a question for Julian, and then we'll come back to Ellie. In perhaps 10 or 20 years' time, what do you think the transport network might look like? Your wacky, wild ideas on what it could look like.
I think we're approaching an era of disruptors, in terms of investment. And I think we've seen significant changes in the balance of industry. You've had the kind of the big four automakers really be challenged.
Yeah.
Many of you might have picked up in the news, Rivian, a new entrant, has launched an IPO, and its initial valuation is around 65 billion US. That compares to the valuation of Ford at around 80 billion US dollars, and they've been around for 100 plus years. And Rivian are making at the moment about 4 or 5 cars a week.
Wow.
So this is the power of startups, and we've seen incredible valuations with Tesla. So I think we're seeing disruptors in terms of industrial players and brands and technologies. And I have to take my hat off to Elon Musk. He's helped change the nature of the industry. I think we're also going to see some disruptions when it comes to the type of transport systems that we all use. I have the luxury, the privilege of being in a university campus, which is one of the trial zones for electric scooters. And once you get over their pesky nature of inexperienced users, actually for micro-mobility in campuses, for example, and in urban areas, they are a great solution. You know, and we're a great family of cyclists, and we use e-bikes as well. You know, these are the technologies that are actually going to change the level of accessibility in different spaces. So as well as the passenger car, you know, we will see electric buses, as we do already in many urban areas, but micro mobility solutions for delivery vehicles and for personal transport. If you like any of you who have been to Terminal 5 at Heathrow and jumped in those automated pods to take you from the car park through to the terminal, those are great opportunities as we develop the technologies around autonomous vehicle direction, driverless systems, particularly in planned and properly mapped and surveyed urban areas. We are not just going to be looking at a personal transport solution that is public transport in the conventional sense. It's going to involve a lot of micro mobility solutions as well, I think.
That's really interesting. One quick bolt on to that. Do you envisage changes in the way freight is moved around our country at the moment?
Very much. I think from a carbon perspective, many will shift to rail, and you know, with these large industrial investments, people are very much looking for rail infrastructure to support as capacity is freed up. But I think we're also likely to see big shifts, not just in the technology used for road vehicles for heavy haul, but also multimodal, where you switch when you get to urban areas from propulsion systems that, for example, use hydrogen fuel cells to give you the range and the duty cycle that you need, into last few mile delivery solutions. And that will make a big difference. And there's a great initiative being looked at for London, you know, in the East End, actually to develop a hub that takes goods from the port and activity in and around the markets in the East End, and then uses electric shuttles to take them into the centre with some autonomy as well. Those are the sorts of things that will make a big difference, rather than massive changes. You know, I know certain territories are really pushing catenary systems for electric propulsion of heavy goods vehicles on motorways. I think the nature of our road network is probably not as conducive to that as in some other territories. So I think we're going to see some mixed mode solutions.
It is great, interesting times ahead, and the sort of disruptive nature of it, and the micro mobility. I think interesting times ahead. Thanks, Julian. If I can take another of the questions in our chat and pose this one to Ellie, and that's around whether clients are behind the Value Toolkit, I guess, and understand that pure net present value analysis may not be appropriate for some projects. Is that something that's coming through in any of the pilot testing, Ellie? So
hopefully it'll be reassuring to come back to say we are working really closely with IPA and Treasury, and that signposting is something that is really critical for us as we move into legacy mode. So yes, absolutely aware, and we're working to make sure that the alignment is absolutely there with the Green Book. It should hopefully also reassure you to say that our strategy board lead for the Value Toolkit is the Director General of Capital Commercial for DFE. So very strong commercial lens that's being put on, and I think we it's probably fair to say if we can convince him that it's a good thing, then we stand a good chance of being able to work with the other commercial leads across the other government departments. But more broadly speaking, I think particularly the procurement teams that we're working with, I maybe wrongly go into a room where we're running workshops and expect that if anyone in the workshop will be challenging, it will be that procurement lead. But more broadly, what we found across the board with all the clients that we're working with is that actually procurement wants to deliver better value as well. I think they're often tarred with that view of over-focusing on a cost-first approach, but actually the people that we've encountered across all of the public sector departments that we're working with actually just really want the tools to be able to deliver better value across the board. So yes, I think that commercial side is absolutely covered.
Thanks, Ellie. Continuing the theme with value, and there's been a comment in the chat around lowest price outcomes to procurement events, and I think we've all sort of been there, got the t-shirt, we've all seen that. Something that I sense the industry is moving in a better way is towards pipeline, and I think between all the speakers, that link between kind of longevity, visibility of what the future looks like, the opportunity that exists there. I don't know if both of you wouldn't mind commenting to that, but I think they're inherently really important things so that the industry can see the long-term future, procure for value in the right way. But if I could invite you both to talk to that, perhaps.
Yeah, of course. I think it's really critical here. So I think it needs to be twofold, though, from my perspective. It is great that we can see the pipeline that is coming down. Yeah. But actually, if we can couple that with understanding what are the priorities for that pipeline in terms of the outcome that we're trying to drive through those investments, then that will really help the market in being able to shape appropriate solutions. Now we're working with a defence programme at the moment that is billions of pounds worth of spend. And actually, if that client turns around and says, this is critical to me, it's critical to me that through this spend, we are able to drive towards our net zero future, the market will absolutely respond. So for me, yes, the pipeline is brilliant, but if we can get clients better articulating the outcomes that they want to see through that investment, then that is even better. And I am absolutely sure that the market will rise to that challenge and respond appropriately.
Resounding endorsement, Ellie, and thank you for that. Julian?
I'd completely agree. I think what we're starting to see is very much an alignment of consumer attitudes, regulation, market forces. One of my past experiences was heading the investment strategy team, looking at a very large pension fund for my sins, and actually those sentiments around where you invest and how you invest in a way that does not expose you to sustainability risks in the future is driving the market forces. So I think we're starting to see things come into alignment as we get much better transparency in the system. We can see the impacts of the decisions that we make because we have a much better information flow globally. And this is going to bring the stars into alignment. I think we're on the right track.
That's great as well. Resounding endorsement as well. So thank you, Julian. I'm acutely aware of time and conscious that I need to try and bring our really interesting chat to a conclusion. I've got one question to pose to you both, the same one. If I could ask for a kind of Twitter style short sentence answer, and then I'll in a few moments be handing over to Catherine Wenger of Arup, who will summarise and close our conference. But before I do, our consultancy and engineering sector, we're really keen to put our hands up. We think we've got the skills to play an integral and leading part in what's going on. If there was one thing that we could do better or differently, what would you say?
Am I going first?
Go on then, Ellie.
I'll volunteer.
Thank you.
I think from my perspective, what the consultancy sector can do is help their clients on this journey. The momentum is there and the clients want to take it. So help clients develop service lines and tools that sit around the methodology of the Value Toolkit. That's absolutely fine. What I'd encourage you not to do is to reinvent that methodology. So stick with the core methodology and develop your service lines around it. And that will help clients move forward in a really consistent way, which will help the market overall.
Thank you, Ellie. Julian, have you thought of an answer?
I have, yeah. I think we're operating in a different paradigm now, and we've got a different context. We've got some different factors at play that have got different drivers, different driving forces on what we do. So I'd encourage the consulting sector to really help open up their clients' eyes to the changing environment and the impact of the decisions and the recommendations that they make. And being part of that information system, that would really help, because frankly, some people can be very conservative with a small c in their approach and in their frame of reference. And I think it's incumbent on the consulting sector to help open up clients' views to the changing context.
You both in different ways saying a very similar thing, and I think that's a challenge that we need to rise to, and I think we're in a good place to do so. Just before I bring Catherine in, Catherine Wenger is Director at Arup and the former chair of ACE Wales. Just like to offer my sincere thanks to our speakers. You've put a lot of effort in, a lot of hard work, and we do appreciate your support. Thank you. I'd like to offer thanks to our audience. Thank you for giving us your time, and thank you for attending. And last thanks go to the ACE team back of house, in particular to Chetna, because without their effort, none of this would have been possible. So my thanks to Chetna and the team. And with that, if I can hand over to you, Catherine, to summarise and wrap us up.
Thank you very much. So yes, I've been scribbling away notes here, trying to take the best bits from each of the speakers. So thank you all, because they were all very, very good talks. So we started with Hannah setting the scene and looking at us shifting the emphasis from decision making that was based around capital cost to decision making based around value. And that's something that is dear to all of our hearts. I know how many times we try to define what value is. So then Ellie introducing the Value Toolkit and helping to define what value is. And I love the quote linking back to David Attenborough that we're all learning together. And this is a new toolkit, and we'll be learning it alongside the clients, and that not leaving anyone behind. So being generous with our learning, and you've both echoed that at the end there about helping clients and helping ourselves move along with this. And I liked your description of the golden thread that enables that connection between policy and outcomes, and that clarity of thought, and that engages everybody with that clear direction of travel. I think that is an immensely helpful thing in a world where there are so many competing demands. Your diagram with all the different elements apart from just climate that we're trying to juggle. Julian, then I liked your worked example. There are so many things you're balancing there, and talking about the values around the supply chain and the ethics and the practicalities of doing that. Really brought that to life, as did the challenge from Sophie around having electric vehicles. That was real time discussion around value and how do we weigh these different things up. Sophie then wrapped it up with giving us the context around the Future Generations Act and highlighting how interconnected all our decisions are, and that it's not just about technology, it's about that mindset and engagement, and engaging the engineers, the creatives, the community, the politicians. So I like to think that the engineers are the creatives, so I would like to see those two things conflict together, but how it needs everybody. And really interesting that Sophie herself brought up procurement as well, and that's something that, but it was great to hear Ellie mention that the procurement departments, they want to see value as well. So I think there's a lot of will to do the right thing and some practical ideas about how we might do that, which is really encouraging. And because it can get quite depressing when you think about the climate emergency, or the climate catastrophe as it's now been called. And we want to do something about that. That's what consultants and engineers, we like to find solutions. And so it's been great to hear about some of the toolkits and the ideas that we can do for that. So exciting times, lots and lots to go for in a short, compressed length of time. It's now, it's real. And the mention of our children, that brings it home every time you look at them, that it's now, and this is with us to do something now. We can't actually rely on the kids to solve it, because it'll be too late by then. So wonderful that we've had this open debate. Wonderful that we're well placed and everybody wants to do something. That momentum is invigorating. So let's see it go forward. So on behalf of ACE Wales, I hope everyone's enjoyed the conference. Thank you very much to Piers for facilitating this. I know it's quite stressful. I remember doing my conference a couple of years back, and it changes. Everything changes at the last minute. So well done for handling all that. Thank you. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Ketna and the back of house staff. And thank you to everybody who has dialed in and remained with us past dinner time. So thank you all ever so much. This event is being recorded, and the slides will be shared as well. So everybody who's joined will get a copy of that. Please feel free to share with your colleagues who weren't able to make the call, and it'll also be on the website. So thank you all ever so much, and we'll see you next year for the next one, maybe in person.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks all.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.